Question is from Marcus. Tips on developing your marketing radar so you can look at what's around you and apply it to marketing. For example, when you saw that, Stefan, that guy freak out at prices in the Armani store and turned it into an email. I like
Yeah.
this one. This is
He's
a fun
asking
thing
how
to
you
do.
have spidey sense, Stefan.
I think it's just I think empathy. Like for that example specifically, just being observant. Again, not being dismissive, like sitting with stuff for a minute and sort of thinking about the underlying kind of mechanism or reason behind the behavior, right? Because when the guy was freaking out at the Armani store, like I could have just like been like, oh, this guy's a weirdo, or this guy's acting weird, like okay, and then gone on. But I'm like, why is he freaking out? And then listening and observing and kind of thinking about, and then so I thought, why is he freaking out? Then I kept gathering clues, I kept gathering information, I kept listening, and kept bringing up price, but how nice it is. But then his wife or girlfriend giving him like the pep talk about how like you're a boss, like the whole thing was so bizarre. But and then me thinking about, okay, well, as somebody, then how do I take that and match it to my experience, which is like mindset related and helping people to escape the cave and belief. Like I guess I have my own filter, my own framework, which is like that there's two sides to like success. There's like sort of belief, you have to like believe you can do it, and then there's sort of like the tactical side where you have like the tools and things. And I guess maybe a third is like the actual doing action. Really, it's like belief, tools, and action. It's really three actually. But you have to actually take action. And so that was sort of why for me it just I'm like, oh, I talk about mindset all the time, and this guy's got a fucking crazy mindset. Why? And then that's how I was able to turn into an email. Beyond that though, I think like just reading books and looking at like trends and like kind of noticing and observing them. I already did this intuitively, and then that book about non-obvious mega trends that I mentioned. Like I like to save stuff. If I see something popping up again and again, I'll start to save it. So like if you look at it right now, it's like social gaming, live stream shopping, like I don't know how you call it, like remote, like remote robotics essentially. Like there's a game that's raised money, like it's a video game thing where you play a video game but you control like an actual robot that's somewhere else, and there's other companies doing that. And then so I started like in our financial stuff right now, like Bank of America, JP Morgan, Merrill Lynch, all of the big banks are like 21 is gonna be like a super good year for stocks. And like, and then you look at all the IPOs that are happening and you're like, oh, okay, DoorDash had this huge IPO, Airbnb had this huge IPO, like all these other companies are doing their IPOs. And so then I'm like, okay, that's a good trend. Like you've got all the big banks that are they're super bullish. There's these really big IPOs that are like, so to me, like when I look at that, I actually do think, just not investment advice, since I'm a professional, I think that 2021 actually will. I think the market's going to go wildly higher for the first like half of the year into the 3/4 of the year. But I don't think it's sustainable. And I think at a certain point, you're gonna have to come back to like the fundamentals of like where these things are valued and what the actual value is. There's gonna be a correction that's pretty large, probably at the end of this year, end of 2021 into early 20. But the point is, the reason I'm even thinking about that is because of looking at trends. I'm just noticing on different websites all these things about IPOs and all these different predictions of like the big banks and Wall Street investment companies, and then I'm starting to see a picture emerges. So and I'm kind of gathering it, and then I'm thinking about what does that mean, and then I'm like, how can I apply that to what I do? So I'm like, for that example of the IPOs and banks, it's like status quo, and I don't like the status quo. That's another my why is helping people to not follow status quo. So I could write a whole email about how everybody's saying that this is going to happen. Like this is why that makes me wary, and here's why, and then relate to my experience. So I'm kind of taking events, noticing trends, observations, kind of collecting them all, and then applying to like my filter and my whys and my beliefs, and figure out how can I talk about teach what I believe in a way that then leverages what's happening with these trends. If that makes sense, hopefully it does. I don't know.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's about, having that sort of almost investigative mindset versus just judging things for face value. Like just as marketers, it's always good to be able to kind of play detective and really look at the reasons why behind, why there's not always a cause and effect, right? Like you have to kind of dig deep sometimes and figure out what actually happened. So I think that's what Stefan, that's what you were doing at that Armani store. is you look beyond just the face value of what that guy, his response, right? You just kind of, you're looking at all the triggers of like, what could have caused that? So having that kind of mindset is super helpful, especially when you're in marketing.
Yeah, and I think it's also fun to create theses, and then like kind of you can look and try to verify them, right? Like, so one thing I've noticed in San Diego especially is like if you look at car sales have actually done pretty well during the lockdown. And then in San Diego, which is a affluent city, and I'm in generally more affluent areas, but you're seeing like I've been noticing for a while, like new cars, like new Porches and BMWs and all this stuff. And I'm like, yeah, that's interesting. But then I'm like, why is that happening? And then I thought it's the other day, I'm like, well, like a lot of people who have more disposable income and still have jobs aren't spending money on traveling. They're not spending money on like, kind of these like luxury experiences. So they have actually more disposable income, and that as a result, but they want to buy something, they want some kind of luxury experience. So they're going and buying like luxury cars at a higher rate. Because like that's something they're going to spend time in their car, and they have more money. They're actually saving money because of COVID, right? And then we're like, okay, that's interesting. So what's going to happen once like, if everyone gets vaccinated, it goes away? How's that going to affect car sales? But the point, what I just said, I actually don't know if that's true or not, but it's an interesting hypothesis. So then it's like, I would go look at data. How many people are buying cars? Like, what's the savings rate been of like people who are, middle to upper middle class? And like kind of validate all of that stuff too. So it's kind of like, don't be afraid to just come up with like your own kind of theories, but then try to validate them by looking at the actual research and seeing what's actually happening. But being curious is just so important. Again, going back to like being curious about human nature and patterns and behaviors and things like that, like really embracing. That's why I always say to embrace rabbit holes, because like I think that's where you come up with like really great ideas.
Yep, I agree with Stefan. And just to re-emphasize and perhaps give you another anecdote that might be helpful, it's like as a because I think the greatest sales job is faith, in my opinion, and because people are just like, man, they get despondent, they get jaded, they look for, and it's something that I'm very involved with, but I'm looking at as a new faith ambassador. So trying to help someone into their faith, and I'm trying to look at it from their perspective, understand their story, where they're coming from, what they have to deal with on a daily basis. And when I'm able to identify the type of fulfillment that they're looking for and belonging and acceptance, it just like, then it's not me, it's right. It's just helping them down that path and proactively looking for that type of information and being as empathetic as possible. It's just don't rely on your own assumptions.
Brooks, it's interesting. When I wrote the bleeding neck email I wrote the other day, I guess yesterday, I thought about churches and like conversions too, right? Because I thought about how, but even if you're trying to get somebody to convert or like become a Christian, right? And you're like, if you do it by being like the promise of an eternal afterlife and going to heaven and things like that, it's like, sure, right? But like that doesn't but if you're like the promise of absolving them of their sin or being washed away of sin and being born again, and like all of the pain and guilt and like inner demons, that like that stuff being that they can really wash that away and then join a community of love and they feel better. It's like that's why people convert, right? That's why people are born again. It's not because of like, oh, I want to be a good boy so I go to heaven. Like sure, people think that, but that's not why they take a big action. It's again that's sort of tangential to this part. I just want to bring that up because it goes back to even the kind of bleeding neck thing. It's really interesting.
Yeah, they want to be absolved of that shame and guilt, and it's something that they wrestle with every day. And it's like the answer to that is not meeting them with more shame and guilt. It's like, if you don't do this, you're going to burn in hell forever. That's like what gets people so pissed off. Yeah. So just interesting.
It is interesting.
And the immediate part too of being a part of that community, right? Because a lot of these people, if they're lost or they don't have connection, then that's a really powerful way to I'm gonna say sell it, but obviously it's not the same.
It is.
Selling it.
We're all selling something.
Yeah.
Well, it's all a conversion problem. I go back to that. I don't want to. There's a danger in thinking this way because you don't want to like turn everything into like. I don't like to dehumanize anything, but I was saying with the vaccine stuff on Road to a Billion, it's like
persuasion, right? This comes back to that persuasion conversation. You're trying to persuade them that this is a good choice, right?
Persuade them to literally convert to like Christianity, or you're trying to persuade them to convert from non-vaccinated to vaccinated, or trying to persuade somebody to convert from a car buyer, from a non-buyer to a car, a non-Audi owner to an Audi owner, and then all the way direct response. It's like you really can look at that filter for almost any kind of big thing. It's like it really is like convert, which is why I think what we don't realize as direct response marketers is the applications of everything, including RMBC, which like the methodology of how you do it But it's really applied to it can be applied to large, like global problems and challenges and some kind of cool.
Yeah, it's awesome.
Sweet.
Yeah, and I actually, believe it or not, I have two seconds. I know we spent a long time on this one, but that was a fun question. Everything they said was super spot on. And then I agree with all of it. I also just think of it as a framework that makes it really simple, right? So there's a hook, which can be an experience, something you see, whatever it might be. There's a transition, and then there's like your call to action or your marketing stuff. And you can segue anything into any other thing if you follow that formula. Like you can literally anything. You can go like one I just literally came up with was cheese into marketing, right? So you've got holes in your cheese, you have holes in your marketing, here's an offer, right? Like literally anything can become any other thing if you just go thing you want to talk about that people like get their attention, like get their emotional attention. And then you've got that logical transition where you bring it back to whatever like Stefan's framework is, like your mantra, your thesis, and then you tell them what to do with it.
Is this how I convinced Sabah to quit giving me crap and embrace the Dolphins?
Yeah. You still have to work on that. You're not doing very well on that pitch.
Yeah, I'm not doing a good job selling.
I think that Hank Hill meme every day might get us to that's a funny show, man. All right, so that was a fun question. Not supposed to play favorites, but that was pretty cool. All right, so the